Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back. This is Alex2K, and today we are talking about fur. So, fur is a technique used to add hair, or in the case you have a really hairy object, then to give it a hairy object. I have these three guys here, and the plane usually by default has a good UV layout. This guy actually I extruded it, so it's got a really bad UV layout, and this one doesn't have them yet, but I'll show you what good UVs are. So let's just go ahead and select this guy and go to the polygon menu set, create UVs, planar mapping, and I'm just going to go ahead and best plane and project. So now this guy has a good UV layout, nice and even. This one has a bad UV layout, and this one has good UVs. Now I'm just going to add a split, or a couple of splits here actually. One like that, and one like that. And the reason why I'm doing that is because it's going to allow me to explain a principle about the UVs when it comes to fur. So fur, how do you go ahead and do fur? First you gotta load the plugin, and you can load the plugin by going to Windows, Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager, and you'll see fur, and on there you gotta check loaded, and auto load will allow you to load fur the next time you open up Maya. So now that we have that, you can access fur by going to rendering, and you'll see your menu that says fur. So you make fur by selecting the object fur, attach fur description, new. And what that does is that it makes a new fur description. As obvious as that sounds, but it's important. If you look here, there is this fur feedback, and there's also a fur description. The fur feedback allows you to change things like the display properties of your fur. So like if it's getting too heavy, you can totally increase or decrease these values, but that doesn't mean it's gonna render less. If you go to the fur description, the density, that's where you actually have how many hairs are going to be rendered. So right now there's going to be 1,000 hairs rendered in this geometry. Like so. Now these guys have a length, and the length is determined by the length. So if the length is less, then of course that's Maya unit, so that's going to be shorter. And there's also a base width and a tip width. The base is down here and the tip's over there. So if you want to change either or, you can simply change the base width right here, 0.005, and the tip width 0.001 or 2. There we go. So that's going to make the tip thinner than the base, and both of them a lot thinner than their length. Okay, so as far as the color goes, here's the base color and the tip color, and you can change those to your own liking, and you can see a little bit of display here. And of course the idea is that the base matches the color of the object underneath. But then comes the question, well, what if I had a texture, an actual texture on my object? So let's make that assumption. So we got this guy, and what we're going to do here is we're going to give it some texture. So usually you can do this procedurally, or you can do it in Photoshop. So, trying to keep it a little bit more consistent with what a real example would do. Let me just go ahead and save this. With a real example, I'm just going to go ahead and make a new (512 by 512). That's fine. And so let's suppose the background is going to be maybe like something maybe kind of like that, and just a new guy here, and I'm gonna make the color black, or actually yeah, like a dark brown there, and brush, and I'm gonna use this brush that I used for the other tutorial. Let's use this guy here. So this is the area that I'm going to be texturing. I just want to get, let's go ahead and make a solid one here and just fill that up really, just like that. Start softening it up. And then going to use one of those guys. And this is sort of like a technique you can use whenever you have your characters. You can have this little strands of hair coming out. So I'm going to keep working on this for a little bit, and I'm going to pause the tutorial while I do this and show you the result in a second. Okay? Hey guys. Okay, so got this texture, nothing too complicated. Let's go ahead and just save this in case under textures. Let's call this base texture. I already saved the texture as an IFF. I could have saved it as a JPEG anyway. And here we go. So here's this guy, and gonna go in and bring in that guy onto the hyper shade. And simply going to assign it here to the color, so it looks like that. Now we're actually going to use this texture for multiple things, and that way we can talk about fur a little bit more in detail. So what happens here is that the fur is based on that UV layout. So if you actually map this same texture to the base color, then it will render out with the same color as whatever's underneath, so they're both matching. So you can more or less get a sense of it, that these guys are darker, whereas this guy's their colors based on that. And we can, let's go ahead and come to Photoshop, and I'm just gonna go ahead and open this base texture again, and I'm just gonna make a little adjustment to the tip. So what I want with the tip is to be a little brighter. So I'm just gonna saturate a little bit more, and let's take this to 0. I'm just gonna saturate a little bit more and adjust the levels on it. So just bring that whole value up a little bit. So this one's a little bit brighter than that one. And again, Control Shift S as a IFF under source images, source texture, tip. And I'm going to bring that tip back here into Maya, and again select the UVs and assign that to the tip color. So now the base and the tip have a color, and now we're starting to get somewhere. Now then you say, yeah, but what about, you know, the fur is supposed to be only where the furry thing is and not outside of it. Well, you can actually paint what's called baldness, and that's what this baldness value is. If it's set to 1, that means that there's no baldness, and if it's set to 0, that means that there's baldness. That means there's no hair. So if you think about that, if you think about that, then we can actually do a texture where in a texture, white means 1 and black means 0. So that means that this guy can be black so that the baldness is 0, and this guy is white so the baldness is 1. So we're gonna save this as baldness. And back in Maya, bring in that baldness. Select the fur and assign this into the baldness right there. So you can't see it here. And as you can see, you're not able to see it. There are some values. Oh, wait. There are some values that you need to bake. So that's the whole attribute here. So that's where you have this bake attribute. The higher the quality of the bake, of the texture that you're going to bake, and of course the higher the quality. So we're just going to bake all, but you can actually go manual. I'm actually going to just do baldness so that it doesn't take too long. I'm going to go ahead and bake the baldness. And now, with attributes like baldness, once that's baked on there, just wait for it for a little bit. $75 and 100% complete. Now, as you can see, that value is there. Now, let's increase the display. So remember, that's going to be under the fur feedback. So I'm going to take this to 50. Maybe that would be too much. Just make it 30 by 30. That's probably good enough. And if you want to bake other attributes so you can see them on the display, you can totally do that. So like if you want to bake the base color, you can do that. So I'm just gonna pause and I'm gonna bake the base color, and I'm also gonna bake the tip color. Okay, so I'll be right back. Okay, welcome back. Okay, so the base and the tip color have been baked, and you can see how that gives you a better representation of what's going on your scene. Now, one thing also to note is that here we see these guys evenly distributed, but they're actually randomized on the their distribution is a little bit more random on the render. So that's something that you wanna keep in mind. So let's keep going. So you have other values like you can also map length if you want to, or with any values. If you come here to details, same for the base color and the tip color, but in this case for the length, what you can actually add is a multiplier and a noise. So if I were to give this length some noise, you can see a length right there, and there's the frequency, and there's a multiplier. So let's make this 0.1, 0.2, and if you change the frequency, higher the frequency, you can go past that value if you want to. The higher the frequency, the closer together they are, and the lower the frequency, then the more of a wave it is. I'm going to increase this amplitude so you can see it better. 0.1, 1.5. So you can see that that's kind of like a little bit bigger, and it starts getting closer. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So now it's even more erratic. Okay. And the amplitude is, the distance from peak to peak. So you can give it a little bit of randomness, or again, you can always map those values and just map, once you have them as a texture, you just assign it on here into the length. What else is on there? Those are some of the main ones. You also have the base curl and the tip curl. So what that's going to do is it's going to curl the base, or it's going to curl the tips. So you can play with those values to get a result. And there's also a scraggle, which is going to scraggle them so they look more straggly. And there's also a frequency for those. So you can see the smaller the frequency, the bigger the wavelength, the higher the frequency, the smaller the wavelength. And if you want to change the correlation, you can do that. You can also clump them. And you can also change the frequency of that clumping. So you can get some interesting effects there. And the segment is how smooth that is. So if it's low, it's like a curve. The more divisions, the softer it is. And those are some of the main attributes that you want to play with. There's also a roll. Just going to roll them into a direction, and the polar, which is the rotation of that roll. Take the base curl off, tip curl and scraggle. Base curl 0.5, tip 0.5. I'm going to give it a roll, and the polar is going to rotate that. So you can see 360 degrees, 0.5 is 180, and then 0. So again, you can always map those values as long as you understand what's going on. And that's basically it. Base curl and tip curl. A little bit of scraggle. And those are pretty much the main attributes there. You can always remember, map or use values, like for example for the curls. You can always give them some noises so that they are randomized. Same with the scraggles and all that stuff. So a render like this would end up looking kind of like that. Well, it returned an error, so that means my computer crashed. So let me pause and open up my scene again and show you the render. Okay, so I'll be right back. Okay, here we go. So after I closed my eye and reopened it, here's my render. Now all these guys have that specular, and that specular value is of course controlled by the specular color. But you can change the sharpness. Let's make it 160. And when you have a bigger specular sharpness, you're going to get a sharper highlight. And when you have a smaller value for the specular sharpness, just like a font, with a lower value, then you're going to get a more spread out specular value. And again, you can always change that specular color to your own liking. Alrighty, and lastly, the shadows, they're controlled by having this guy have shadows. So I can use the F-maps, or I can use ray trace. And on the for feedback, you see render stats, and that's where you can tell if you want the primary visibility off or on, the cast shadows or on off, to receive shadows, and so on and so forth, be visible in reflections or refractions. So you can even tell it to cast final gather or to receive final gather, and you can override the sampling, the quality. So like if I take this to, let's say, 0 and 0, then the quality is going to be sort of like lower for the fur than it is for the rest of the scene. And that's going to allow it for faster rendering. So you can see the shadows there, and the colors are matching the. And you know, if you always want to paint some baldness values, you can always do that. You can just go into fur, paint fur attributes, and you can just go ahead and select what you want. So say baldness. And if we change that value to 0, then we can paint baldness values off. And if you need a higher fur description value, you can do that as well. So this computer doesn't crash on me. You can simply increase this to say, I'm gonna go just to 50 and 50 so that my computer doesn't get too crazy on me. So you can paint any value you want, and you can increase your densities and so on and so forth. Alright, so those are some of the basics for fur. I'm gonna keep that one up to that point because I want to move into the next. Well, there's a texture under there, so if I move the texture, of course the UVs, you'll see that the texture is gonna move, and just like the texture is gonna move, so will the fur. So you can see that the fur is like, wait, what? So that's important, that you lay out your UVs properly without overlapping or anything like that, so that you don't get any artifacts with fur. Oh, one more thing. I'm just gonna come here and go for attach for a description. I can attach a set one, but I'm gonna attach a new one. And this guy has a bad UV layout, and that's why those things look like that. Whereas here, since I already laid out the UVs, it looks nice and even. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're working with fur, and you want to work on the smooth version because otherwise you can see that happening. So if instead this guy, and if you press 3, it's not gonna do it. If you actually smooth it and take that keyboarder off, and divisions 2, and fur, attach fur description, so now it's evenly spread. So that's another reason why hair is not done early on but later on. One more thing that you can do to experiment with fur is if you go to the fur description, there's presets, and you can play with those presets, and you can even blend them with a percentage, and you can come up with your own. Okay, and these have the same principles, just a little bit more work applied on them, but the principles are always the same. And if you again need to change your global scale, or if you just want to change some of the values that are on there, then it's up to you. Always read the notes so that you understand what's happening with these attributes. Okay? Alrighty, so those are the principles of fur. So I guess just to finalize this, I'm going to go ahead and open Rudy's scalp. And in the case of the scalp, since you already have a UV layout and everything's pretty much done properly, then it's just selecting the scalp, fur, attach fur description, new. Actually, first smooth this guy, and fur, delete the history, fur, attach fur description, new. So now you can see what's happening there with the fur, and from there on it's just playing with all those attributes this case, I'm just gonna come here and do a lion's mane. And then we have a lion Rudy. Okay, alrighty, so I'll see you with the next tutorial, and I hope this one wasn't too extensive. I'll see you. Bye bye.